Okay, so the next question is, does Jiu-Jitsu have a standard curricula? And the answer is no, because you probably would have found it if you were Googling around for it. There are certain sort of vague standards that different instructors will have, or different associations or affiliations will have, that blue belts must know this and that and the other thing. But if you were to dial into that with any of those instructors, they would, I'm sure, say that, well, of course this doesn't cover everything they should know, and there's different cases, blah, 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 blah. What I'm getting at is there's no standard curriculum for Jiu-Jitsu, but I don't think it's because it's impossible to make one. I don't think it's because it's beyond us in any way. It's interesting in the sense that every skill or game that people have engaged in has at some point come up with varying amounts of symbols and notation by which they record past games or past events, and then they can put forward proposed plays or options. So a couple examples of this, chess, for example, can be someone who is very familiar with chess can just read a chess match as the moves occurred and understand exactly what happened, because they're translating those symbols into the board that they have in their imagination, and they know how that plays out. Same thing with a lot of team sports. You'll see how plays are notated or drawn, and then the players can then very quickly adopt or get rid of certain plays based on this common language, this common notation. And then lastly, sort of branching off with music, you have a system of notation that allows for someone today to play pieces that were written, 300 years ago. So what happened with Jiu-Jitsu? Why didn't that occur, and what is the consequence of that? Well, what I think happened is Jiu-Jitsu obviously came up to us by and large from Brazil and was popularized in the UFC and exploded in terms of just curiosity. People were like, what is this thing that this guy, Royce or however you say his name, Royce Gracie, is doing? What is that? I want to learn it. And so when I started, there was very little instruction available online, especially video instruction. If you got a small GIF or GIF, or however you say it, like small animation showing a technique, well, that was a really rare find, and you were going to really study that. Seeing step-by-step photographs for moves was also available, but it was kind of clunky because you could not get a sense of the dynamic, fluid movement that was needed to actually articulate that movement yourself. And so what happened was Jiu-Jitsu continued to evolve, competitions continued to happen, and then this crazy thing called the internet came along, and videos were able to be uploaded, and people started studying the videos and emulating what they saw in the videos, and then videos would be made of that, and people would emulate those videos, and it just kind of kept cycling through. Very similar to like taking a photocopy and making a photocopy of it, and making a photocopy of that, and just continuing down the line. It sort of skipped the phase of creating notation or creating a common language for Jiu-Jitsu, which is why sometimes the process of teaching Jiu-Jitsu can be somewhat confusing, because when somebody says, control their hips, what isn't really being addressed is, what does that mean to control someone's hips? Does it mean to prevent their hips from moving in a way that you don't want them to move? Does it mean moving their hips in a specific way and only that way? Does it mean not letting it move up, but you let it move down? Like, what does control mean, right? So we have all these terms that are somewhat descriptive of what happens in Jiu-Jitsu, but are not necessarily the best terms that could be used. For example, I think that instead of saying space, like make space or use space, we should say slack, because that is a closer description to what our human tissues experience in the joints, in the connective tissue, all of that. And by understanding slack instead of space, we can immediately put in the term torque, which is the twisting force that we would use to remove slack. So if you have slack in like a towel, you can twist it and remove the slack. So to circle back to the original question, is there a standard curriculum for Jiu-Jitsu? No, there is not right now, because there hasn't been a necessity for one, but there should be one, and I am very strongly in favor of creating common language and vocabulary that we use to talk about Jiu-Jitsu, because that is the way by which we will eventually come to a good curriculum for beginners. And right now, as it stands, you can watch instructionals and continue to copy the movements, and that will be useful. But if you can allow yourself to narrate in your own mind using language like torque and slack instead of pressure and space, for example, then you're on your way to unifying the way that you see Jiu-Jitsu. Instead of there having to be, let's say, Rafael Mendez's game and Marcelo Garcia's game, and what is going on, what, are they different, are they the same? You can start to look at what are the underlying principles that govern both of their games. A couple ideas here are, don't fall. Your nervous system is always responding and adjusting to the gravitational field and does not want to smash into the ground. That's why when you trip, you catch yourself before you hit the ground, hopefully. And that's one of the, if not the most important principle in Jiu-Jitsu, one of the most important principles is don't fall unintentionally, make your partner fall. The entire art of judo is built on that moment where they start to fall, the kazushi. Torque removes slack from the system, and the person who is in control of the slack is the person who is attacking, the person who is ahead. And you attack and remove slack until you get to a point where you can have complete control over the slack by means of a strangle, which they can either tap to or they go to sleep. So there is no standard curricula, but I think we are sort of in the weeds right now, sorting out what that might look like. And I, again, am not in favor of a curriculum that is these 30 moves, but more, here's how humans move, running, throwing, etc. Can you do those things properly? Or do you have impingements in your shoulders and hips that prevent you from doing that? Once you've reached baseline, normal human movement, then can you do these things in Jiu-Jitsu? And the answer is, yeah, you probably can if you have all of these baselines in place. And that's something that I'll continue to cover in our future videos. If you want more videos, please click below to subscribe. If you want to dive in deeper, you can click here to get a free video seminar I did of one of my favorite sequences from standing to submission. And if you have any questions or anything you want to see, please leave it in the comments below.